Ahead of tomorrow's impeachment vote, let's take a look at impeachment's past for a little bit of guidance. Michael Conway served as counsel for the House Judiciary Committee during Nixon's impeachment inquiry. He's with us now from Chicago. And Michael, you helped draft the House Judiciary Committee's final report during Nixon's impeachment. How have these impeachment proceedings been different?
Well, they've been different in a couple of ways. We had the benefit of a Senate investigative committee, Senator Sam Ervin, who developed a lot of the factual evidence that we relied upon in the summer of 1973. The impeachment inquiry really didn't begin until January of 1974. We also received, which the current House Judiciary Committee has not received, a report from the grand jury, the special prosecutor who was investigating Watergate, which included tapes and other documents. So we had a factual predicate to base our inquiry on and didn't start from scratch. The current investigation, at least as to Ukraine, really has started as a congressional investigation. They didn't have the benefit, Congress hasn't had the benefit of a prior investigation.
Do you think that's put them at a disadvantage, that they didn't have something to work off of, or have they done a pretty good job of making up the difference here?
They've done a pretty good job against very daunting odds. One big difference here is that President Trump has been much more brazen, much more aggressive in claiming privilege than even President Nixon did. President Nixon, and we found out later in the White House tapes, mulled over the issue of asserting executive privilege and was concerned about, frankly, that how people would understand that they would think he was covering up. President Trump doesn't seem to have that same misgiving. President Nixon did very much block Congress from receiving, in response to subpoenas, the White House tapes or documents, but he did allow some of his witnesses to testify. Now, albeit they committed perjury when they testified.
But he did let them do it, right?
Yeah, they walked into that trap, I'm afraid.
Michael, this is the first time the articles of impeachment have come before the Rules Committee that's going on today. What do you make of that difference in today's process?
Well, so the Rules Committee is designed to set up the procedure tomorrow for the vote. In 1986, there was a procedure set up, and then it was adopted in the Clinton impeachment in 1999, and it set up the rules for procedure. The rules are kind of interesting tomorrow. One thing is that there can be a wide-ranging debate, but there's an express prohibition from saying anything derogatory about a member of the House or a member of the Senate. So the Republicans can't say anything about Adam Schiff, as they have so far in their dialogue. And the House members, Democrat members, can't say anything about Mitch McConnell prejudging on those kinds of issues. So I think that'll be important. And then one other thing to consider is there are two articles of impeachment. Under the rules, at least as they existed before, and I suppose they'll follow those today as well, is that each article is voted separately. In the Clinton impeachment, the House Judiciary Committee submitted 4 articles of impeachment to the House. Only 2 were adopted and 2 were rejected. It's possible tomorrow we'll find some Democrat voting for one article of impeachment or not, but not the other, to sort of show that they were taking a very balanced view of the evidence.
Any other glaring differences, in your opinion, between the impeachment that we're seeing right now and President Clinton?
Not so much with President Clinton, because it was a pretty much a party line impeachment. There's a huge difference between what happened in the House Judiciary Committee in the Nixon impeachment. Of the 38 members of the House, there were 21 Democrats, 17 Republicans. 3 articles of impeachment were adopted. In one, 6 Republicans out of the 17 joined in the articles, and another one, 7 out of 17. We're not going to find that tomorrow. It's going to be much more of a party line vote.
As you look back at impeachments over time, how do you feel that media coverage, the introduction of social media, how has that changed the process today? I mean, it doesn't seem like the Clinton proceedings were all that long ago, but the times we're living in are certainly very different.
It's changed things enormously. I mean, there's so much political pressure on both sides, really, on social media. And that didn't exist either in the Clinton time. It certainly didn't exist in 1974 for the Watergate impeachment. We were able to operate, and the committee was able to operate pretty much without outside influence. That's just not true today.
Anything in particular you'll be watching for tomorrow? If someone wants to watch it with a little more historical perspective, any advice for them?
Sure. A couple things. One is I think we should see the moderate Democrats and how they're voting. Some of them have already express their point of view, that it's a vote of conscience. I think we should also see if both articles of impeachment have the same number of votes or if there's going to be any difference. But most importantly, I think the public ought to hear, this is a preview to what the trial is going to be. They're going to hear both sides of the argument about impeachment, and they can begin making a reasoned judgment for themselves. Even if the president isn't removed, this is going to have a huge influence on the election next year.
Michael Conway, thank you so much for being with us and sharing your insights. I appreciate it.
Very much. Thank you.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.